Blackstone Audio presents The Fire Engine That Disappeared by Maj Sjöwall and Per Waller, translated from the Swedish by Joan Tate. Introduction. Let me be completely honest from the outset. When I was invited to write the introduction to The Fire Engine That Disappeared, I somewhat guiltily realized that I had never read a single word written by Maj Sjöwall and Per Waller. I had frequently read articles about the famous pair, and learnt from many knowledgeable critics that they were among the very finest writers of modern crime fiction. But such literature amounted to little more than books about the books, and not the books themselves. And with me, as with many others, the epithet famous more often than not signifies unread. Why was this? I really ought to have been more kindly disposed toward the Swedes, since they had been the very first nation to translate my own books, and from quite early on I had attended crime conferences in Stockholm and in Göteborg, where my most abiding memory is of the high price of alcohol. But the names of our two authors did not trip off the tongue with the easy familiarity of other foreign crime writers, like Simenon or Dürrenmatt, and I got to read neither of them. A bigger factor, I am sure, was the view I've held for most of my life, that the best definition of poetry is what gets lost in translation, and I have usually assumed, maybe correctly, that style in prose writing also falls victim to the same potential malaise. And talking of translation and pronunciation, the reader of this novel must occasionally, surely, feel a little intimidated by such topographical polysyllables as, for example, Karlviksgaten is a street running from Norr-Mellerstrand to Hantverkargaten, quite near Fridhemsplan, chapter 27. All a bit off-putting, isn't it? But I took heart from the Sunday Telegraph quote for the blurb. If you haven't read Sjöwall and Waller, start now. So I started, although with considerable clutter in my mind about what to expect. My first preconception was that this husband and wife team, with a political stance well to the left, had become rather too bitterly critical in the 60s and 70s of what they saw as the betrayal of many of their socialist ideas and ideals. My second was that their modus scribendi was deeply influenced by the 87th Precinct books of Ed McBain, with real-life crime found predominantly in cities rather than in sleepy English villages. Third, that during these same years, Sweden had become so liberal-minded about sex and sexuality that any sensitive soul might well have to be prepared for, or to hope for, a few paragraphs of explicit titillation. Unexpectedly, it was none of these factors that struck me first. What struck me was the gently underplayed humor of the writing. Let me give some examples. An apartment building in Stockholm blows up spectacularly in the opening pages and is burnt to the ground.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?